Now, look, if I'm honest, if I'm being totally honest with you, 100% transparent, yeah, social media is making you depressed and it's causing you anxiety. And although you're not necessarily relating what you're talking about now directly to social media, I'm telling you that the time you spend on there comparing yourself to other people essentially is what's causing your issues. Now, don't get me wrong, being a man in today's society is very, very difficult as it is. So there's a lot of other external pressures, particularly when we look at how the man through the ages has had a pressure to be tough, to be, the provider, therefore making an income, to be now in today's society emotionally intelligent and available. And not to say that these things are too much, but it's a lot of pressure when you add that onto all the other external things going on. Now we have this thing called social media, essentially the internet connecting us all to everyone else's success story or everyone else's opinion on what it means to be X, Y, and Z. It's damaging. And because it's so constant, it's so easy to tap into. Now, what's happening, generally speaking, is you're going through life and you're experiencing moments of essentially boredom. That's what's happening. Or your mind is so, given how you've described this, your mind is so in work mode that you're trying to find an escape. That's the other sort of mechanism most people access social media in. So it's either boredom or it's escapism for the most part, right? If you're not actively posting on there, and that's a whole different category unto itself, but if you're not actively posting on there, then the fact that you're signing into these apps frequently, not just on a daily basis, but frequently throughout the day, suggests that it's either, again, escapism or you're bored. Now, both of those things are a reality of life, and we all as humans have things, we all have moments of boredom and we all will fill that with something, and we all have moments of needing to escape and we'll fill that with something. So it's not to say that that's the problem, but what you fill those things with can lead to problems. So in the example of it being boredom, you'll just scroll through the app, and now, although you're not doing anything, hence being bored, you're now looking at everyone else doing stuff, right? You're literally scrolling through activity. Activity is happening. Every single post that you see is somebody doing something, somewhere, experiencing something. And therefore, immediately what that does to someone who's sat in a position of boredom is it tells them they're not doing anything. It kind of is like a subconscious, you're not doing anything. And now if you're on the journey of life and you're looking at other people doing stuff and you're not doing anything, one of the things that will lead to, if you're not just a lazy person, a lazy individual, is that's going to lead to anxiety. Now take the person that's in the same situation but doing it from escapism, just wants to just leave their reality for a moment or whatever, which is absolutely understandable as well. But now you're scrolling, and you're engaging with things which enable you to leave where you're at, but also are putting unrealistic. It's like a fantasy. It's now you've now created this world in which you log into your app and you're witnessing the fantasy of everyone else's existence versus the reality of yours. And again, when those two things are balanced, that is going to create anxiety and also eventually lead to depression. And now depression is a real thing that kind of creeps up on a lot of people, right? Because they don't necessarily know they're depressed until one day they just go, man, my life sucks. And the contribution of social media to that, often without even knowing it, is huge. And I say that because obviously depression itself has grown since social media has grown. The amount of anxiety diagnosed in young people now has grown exponentially along with the rise of social media and the expectations that it creates on people. So, for example, you take your average fitness influencer. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with someone encouraging you to be in shape and to work out, but subconsciously, if this person has the ideal body, you're now also kind of looking at something unrealistic. And what I mean by that, let me clear this, because it's not unrealistic in that you can't go and earn it and work out and do that, but it's unrealistic in that you'll never look like that person, because your genes are different, your family is different, your metabolism's different, your lifestyle is different. And so whilst you can do things to improve upon with this person's help, the fact is that you're again exposing yourself. And I don't want this to be the problem, because sometimes we do need goals to aim at. We need things to aim at to improve ourselves. That's a really important part, particularly of being a man. You want to feel like I'm not just sitting back. It's not like I've made it, right? I'm not just going to sit back and act like I've done everything that needs to be done now. There's always more learning to do, more developing to do, more wisdom to gain, more strength to increase, whatever. So it's important that you are able to, progress and see growth as a man, and these things may help you do that. But what I'm talking about is the subconscious, what it's doing to your subconscious when you are consistently exposing yourself to essentially excellence, unrealistic excellence. And let me try to break that down if I can, because the unrealistic part is, myself included, when I post, let's take the average image, right? Me sat wherever, call it an exotic location, maybe some friends. It's a split second image. It's a split second moment where everyone's saying cheese and smiling and whatever, right? But you have no idea about the 2 hours leading up to that. You have no idea about what happened after that image. All you leave with is how good my life must be because of that image, right? You take it a step further, video. And as we know as well, let me add to that before I discuss video, let me add to that timelines aren't always timelines, right? I can, as we all know, I can post something today that I actually experienced 3 months ago. And yet today you're looking at it like, oh, wouldn't a holiday be nice? Yeah, but I'm not on holiday, but you think I am. Do you see what I mean? So now let's take video. It goes a step further. It's kind of, again, you're seeing a magnificent moment for 3 minutes or whatever the limit is. If we talk about TikTok or something like that, 15 seconds, the smallest minimum sort of thing. And so again, we're exposing ourselves to this 15-second, few minute highlight of someone else's life, someone else's career, and we're now drawing comparison to that. And so this now, comparison, becomes this heavy word in which is actually the thing behind the social media, which is creating and leading to the anxiety and the depression. So the comparison, it's this versus me, what I see versus my reality. That constant comparison to something that is essentially that you regard as better, you regard as something I would like to experience, something I would like to do. The constant exposure of that to yourself, to your psyche, is damaging. We weren't supposed to be exposed to things like that. I mean, look, the human race obviously is developing, evolving, call it what you will. However, if we just take the example of a 20, 30, couple hundred years ago, the experience, people say the world's getting worse. The world's not necessarily getting worse. It's just a case of we are exposed to more, hearing about it more, right? Everyone's got a camera in their pocket. Everyone's got a podcast, for example, right? So we're exposed to more of the world than we ever have been. Yes, there's more people around, but is it any worse or better? Who's to say? The fact is that we can see worse and we can see better if we choose to look more. The problem is that that's just a lot of information for a person to constantly be absorbing. And I think the constant overload of information also leads to things like depression and anxiety, because you're not supposed to deal with all of that. If you think about it, even if you shut off the news outlets and you shut off social media, your life would still have a lot of stuff going on. You'd still have a lot of wins, losses, drama, excitement. You'd still have a lot of that going on without all of that. So that's how people used to live, believe it or not. And they used to get on with their day and not feel like their life wasn't as good as it could be, because they weren't always exposing themselves to, you know, what's going on next door, what's going on upstairs. And that constant exposure and that constant comparison is really driving young men in the wrong direction. And so when you add that to the external pressures that are already on young men, it's no wonder that we end up with things like toxic masculinity, and we end up with a huge suicide rate, and we end up with a generation of young boys that don't really know what they're supposed to be, how they're supposed to behave, and it's becoming increasingly difficult. And I think really, whilst that is all happening, and that is a reality of the world we live in, you as a man also are responsible for what you put in, what you absorb, what you listen to, what you let whisper in your ear, what you compare yourself to. And so one of the first steps to kind of getting rid of some of this constant anxiousness is to stop the comparison, and potentially stop the time, limit the time that you're spending on these apps. Acknowledge the fact that whilst there might be a dopamine hit, which is actually, strangely enough, impacting you in a negative way as well as a man. Because whilst dopamine is a good thing, you're stimulating dopamine without an actual stimulus, right? And so in the right stimulus of dopamine, for example, you'll get a dash of dopamine if you go to the gym. And if you come out, if you leave a good workout, you're going to feel some dopamine, which is good and is essentially the boosting of your testosterone levels, right? The stuff that gives you a bit of edge, you know, as a man. But when you now scroll through your phone, you're still getting that same kind of hit, but there is no there's no benefit. So it's like chewing gum, for example. Yeah, you're not eating. Your body thinks you're eating, but you're not. So there's no nutrients coming in. And essentially what the result becomes is hunger. You chew for long enough and you just get hungry if you're not eating, because you're tricking your body into thinking it's eating something, and your belly's going, well, we're not processing anything. Hunger. And so the same thing is applying when you're on these apps, on this social media, constantly hitting yourself with this dopamine, but you've not actually done anything, right? And so that in itself, that I'm seeing so much happen, but I'm not doing so much, is also going to impact your mental health and your anxiety levels. So you've got to know how to limit that in order to not constantly expose yourself, because again, that's also going to make you feel a certain way. It's going to make you feel sluggish. It's going to essentially drain energy from you that you haven't even spent, right? And if you're constantly doing that, again, it's going to lower your testosterone levels. And it's not all about testosterone, by the way, but if we talk about some of the things that make us feel more masculine, that is essentially a big part of it. That's what a lot of these influencers display physically, but aren't necessarily telling you how to achieve otherwise, you know. And, you know, on that note, there are things like products, right? If we just talk about masculinity and testosterone for a moment, products that you use, right, are reducing that. I don't want to dive too deep, but if you think about how men used to be and how we used to be regarded as tough and for good or for bad, society was harder on men, right? And even your life was harder. And it doesn't mean that there weren't people successful, but I mean like warm water, right? As a man, as a woman, whatever, you're showering cold water. You're not using soap necessarily. And if you are, it's not all of the chemicals that are now applied, that you're running through your hair and is essentially soaking into your bloodstream. The foods that we eat, right? The whole foods that they used to eat versus all of the chemicals and combinations and beautiful things that now modern day food looks like, this is impacting you, right? And so even this thing that we're now discussing, this dopamine hit, this social media, seeing other people achieve, seeing other people's success, and simultaneously sometimes not even able to reach those heights yourself, not through any fault of your own necessarily, but society isn't necessarily rigged to get you where it used to be as a young man, right? Unemployment levels are now at an all-time high in the UK in particular. most likely across the world. And it's because, you know, and it's because of AI and various things like that. But it as a result, a man isn't able to necessarily go and do the things a man used to do. Now, again, whether or not that's good or for bad, where a man used to draw his identity from, I'm not saying 200 years ago was a better identity to the one today. We've got, just like then they had to form it 200 years after the society that had formed it, and today we've got to form it 200 years after them. So it's not to keep going back in time, but it's, again, it's somewhat, there is a design, I believe, for masculinity. And that's the point, just as there is for femininity, and how those two things coincide. And obviously what that creates when they do coincide. All of us, billions of people, right? So there is a part to play, and that's the thing that I'm trying to address here, that aspect of the part men have kind of been brought up or expected to play versus the part they find themselves playing in today's society. So we hit spots where, again, influencers can be good, influencers can be bad. Being on social media in general isn't a bad thing, but to be overexposed, to be constantly making comparisons to yourself is just not a healthy outlook. And I think that it's really important that as young men you get back to life to some extent, right? You get back to just being in the world and not necessarily scrolling through your time in the world all the time, and starting to do some of the things you want to do, because also this is draining your energy. Right, and I'm appreciative of everyone listening this long into such a podcast. But even this now, your mental energy is being drained. Now, this might be reserved for you to be learning, which is great. You have to save some space like that every day as a man, I believe. But you also have to be aware that by the time you log off from this or scroll on to the next thing, your mind has been through so many different thinking cycles that it's now taken something from you. It's taken an element of creativity from you. One of my closest friends said that his account got hacked, his Instagram account got hacked, and he said he deleted the app for like 2 weeks. But he said the 2 weeks experience that he had, whilst a few days might have felt a bit, itchy because you're not doing what you're used to doing. He said the clarity of thought, the drive, the motivation he had to do everything else that he was supposed to be doing was just night and day. And I think that there is so much to learn from that. He might have been driven to do it accidentally, or it wasn't something he chose to do, but the result of what happened to him was that his life became better. Now imagine that your life becomes better because you're no longer looking at better lives. Do you know what I mean? And that's the thing. It's like, if you start to actually live more in reality than you do on your phone, which is already a bit of a weight, right? My phone, I love it and I hate it. I actually hate it because I remember a time, I'm old enough to remember a time where I didn't have a phone, right? And I wasn't consistently contactable. You might expect to, if you message me, if that's what we're talking about, a text message, you might expect to reply the next day, sort of thing. Not necessarily, but you understand it wasn't instantaneous. And then, of course, you couldn't then go and check if I had posted that day to see if I was alive, and, oh, why haven't you responded? And 2 ticks and, constant calls, and why didn't you answer? And I haven't heard from you in a long time. It's so intrusive. It robs so much of your peace, and I tell you that if you're like watching me now saying, yeah, that's just you, bro, I dare you, right? Look at all the social media challenges there are, right? Look at all the social media challenges, the 7-day workout, the 75, the bucket challenge, and I'm for good or for bad, whatever. But if you think you haven't got a problem and you think social media's got nothing to do with your anxiety and depression, then my challenge to you is to put your phone to delete your social media apps for 7 days. That's my challenge to you and my solution to you. Just see what it feels like. Can you go 7 days? Because I shouldn't even have to convince you. If it's not a problem, then that should be all right. It doesn't mean that much to me. In which case, you're probably someone that needs to look slightly deeper about the reasons as to why you might be feeling these things. But if there's any resistance in you, right, to do that, then it suggests there's a problem. And that is the problem I'm speaking of when I say it's a love-hate relationship. I love the fact that I'm able to reach my cousin in Nigeria and my cousins in the US like that. I love that. But I also hate the fact that I am on tap. And if I don't respond within 24 hours, something must be wrong. Or an hour sometimes, something must be wrong. I don't like that. And that is also driving someone to be anxious, because the amount of time someone like me checks my emails per day, that's not normal, right? During the working day, working hours, perhaps, but it's just like, it's not normal on weekends to be checking emails. It's not normal on weekends to go in and out of 5 different apps just to check messages. Do you see what I mean? Because I'm on all of them, so there must be a message in one of them. And this is a common experience. So whilst there are many things that are out to get the male psyche and to try and remove good men from society, this is one of those creepers. It's not the most obvious. And like I said, there are times where this thing is your friend, and it can be. So to mitigate that, if one of the problems is actually it's useful, it's business, because I appreciate that. It's not work. It's not just social for everybody. There's business and, again, motivational things and information and education. So it's not just let me put it away and act like it's not there. But what I would say is to, first of all, limit the time that you use on the apps, if it's just this, and then to essentially that you've got, work your algorithm, right? It means to unfollow some unhealthy stuff, unfollow some stuff that makes you feel anyway anxious, or anytime you leave that thing, unfollow it, and then try to follow, search, hashtag some more positive things. Now, what I don't want to do is tell you to just replace the negative with positive, because even the positive can become negative if it's constant and you live on your phone. It's not good for you. Or you live on your laptop or whatever, wherever you're accessing this from. So I'm just saying, if it's more constant for you, then one of the first things is to replace some of the negative stuff, right? Replace some of the stuff that's always speaking to you. Your algorithm has been speaking to you for years. Some of the people watching this may have found this from their algorithm because some of the things that they were searching for, but some may have just dropped upon it. Do you see what I mean? But the point is that your algorithm is showing you what it thinks you want to see, because you have searched this stuff or seen this stuff or stopped and been active on this stuff for longer than anything else that you have. So it's now trying to feed it to you. It's a feed. What are you eating? It's a feed. What are you eating? Because what you're eating tells me how healthy you are. And if your diet is out of line, don't expect to be healthy. And so if your feed is out of line, don't expect this to be healthy.